do like very much like drift diving, or even the flasher. Like they'll come look at it maybe. The best way to hunt bluefin for us, for the most part, it changes a little bit every year, but it's pretty much to drive around in the boat until you find the fish, whether they're foaming or puddling, or whether they're just meter marks, and then get in the water and try to shoot them. It's pretty simple, but there's a lot of ways to make it go a lot simpler than things. A lot can go wrong, I guess is what I'm trying to say. I think personally, probably 3 or 4 people, as far as guys that are involved in the, like John was saying, it's a team thing. I'd say like 3 to 4 people is like the perfect number, really. There's one guy driving the boat. There's at least one guy assisting the guy driving the boat as like a spotter, like looking for whether there are fish on the surface. Yeah, pretty much looking for surface sign, whether that's foaming or birds, or whether that's what we call a breezer. Does everyone know what a breezer is? This is a kind of a new thing for a lot of California divers. A breezer is when the school of fish is swimming just under the surface, and like, I guess the surface tension is just slightly different above those fish than it is in all of the surrounding waters. So if you have calm, fairly slick conditions, you'll see this like rippling effect on the surface. And there's like different degrees of it. Some days it's super obvious, and some days you need like a very like well-trained, adapted eye to see it at all. And guys will drive right over breezers all the time and have no clue that they're plowing over a school of 200-pound fish. Anyway, so that second guy is helping look for these signs. His job also, depending on if you're putting 1 or 2 guys in the water, which I'll get into why I prefer to just put 1 in the water in a minute. But say you're going to put 1 or 2 guys in the water, he's also helping their gear. A lot of guys like to drive around with all the bungees and the floats already out deployed behind the boat. I personally don't care for that. I think it's just an extra strain. The guys that are trying to breathe up and relax before the dive are now probably holding on to their bungees, which is just another thing for them to focus on instead of focusing on relaxing. And then once you do like kind of slide into position where it's time to dive, by the time they're jumping off the boat, the gear's already pulling them backwards, and they're probably trying to swim forwards or to the side, and I think it just makes it less likely that you're going to have a successful hunt. So what I prefer to do is to have the floats on deck, but in a position where they're kind of out of the way, and then have all the gear coiled down, all the bungee, which I typically dive with like a 100-foot bungee for bluefin, have all the bungee coiled down so that when the diver goes off the side of the boat or off the transom, it will freely pay out. So basically it's coiled so that the top of the coil is the side that's connected to the gun. And as soon as both divers go, let's say you slide into position and the divers both go, that second guy who was not driving the boat is there, and he's free to help pay those lines out freely. So the divers, they can just swim and the line will just go, and then he just has to see that the floats make it off the boat before they pull the trigger, or else, the floats are going to make a real mess of the deck. As far as finding the bluefin, it's constantly changing, and again, this is why it's important to have a good network of people that are also interested in the same things you are, because every time you go out, it's going to be the fish. I mean, these fish can move, tens of miles per day, if not 100 miles a day, easy. And they cover a ton of ground, and they're constantly moving. They're behaving differently every single day. So it's important to know where they were, the day before, within the last couple days, and important to know what they were doing as far as activity, so that you know what you're looking for kind of right off the bat. Birds have been pretty helpful and successful for the last couple of years, but we've also had years where there wasn't a whole lot of like bird activity with the terns and sheer waters predominantly on the fish. Breezers and foamers is the most obvious. You pretty much pull up to them, get up in front of the direction they're moving, and try to get in the water. Most of the big fish we've shot have been, in my experience, have been breezer schools. So again, you see that ruffled water, or sometimes you even just see the Allison fins on the bluefin, those short dark fins. They'll be just barely breaking the water. You might even see some backs of fish breaking the water. That's my favorite. That's what gets me the most excited, when you see those fish and they're kind of in that, we don't really know what they're doing, if they're digesting or if they're just resting. Whatever they're doing, that's my favorite, because that's when they seem like they're most interested in playing ball with the spear fishermen. Anyways, you'll get in the water, you'll basically swim towards where the guys on the boat are directing you, and a lot of times you'll see the fish below you or in front of you on the surface, and that's when I make a dive. You'll dive down and level off. A lot of times, if they're already on the surface, it might not have to be any more than 20 to 40 feet. And then it's a matter of, a lot of times, you don't necessarily really get to choose the bluefin you get. You take the one that's the best shot in most cases, because they'll stay out just outside of your range almost always, and there'll be like one or two that give you an opportunity, the closest fish, and you have a split second to make that decision to extend your gun and pull the trigger. And if you don't, well, you're going to go back to the boat and do the whole thing again, and the driver's going to be frustrated, and the guy helping on deck's like, oh, I don't know why they're not connecting. They were right there. So that's with breezers. If they're foaming really hard, you pretty much get in the water when you get the boat as close to the foamer as you can. And you don't want to run it over, because if they're touchy, the whole foamer will sink out. A lot of times you'll like get close to it, slow the boat down, approach with the boat as close as you can, and then divers will go in the water, they'll swim at it as fast as they can. The fish will tend to sink out really quick when they're foaming, because they're like actively eating and they're real spun up. And so you'll have to punch a dive really quick and try to basically cut one off and get a shot in. It's kind of random how that plays out. Sometimes you have a lot of really good opportunities in a day, and sometimes you just keep getting in the water on foamers and all you see is scales. Yeah. Does anyone have any questions specifically about bluefin? It's really not that complicated. It's mostly just finding the big ones, or putting the time in and waiting for the big ones if that's what you're interested in. And then having the right equipment is really important. I prefer either a 4 or 5 band gun. I typically, all these years of shooting bluefin, I've been using the Rife Blue Water Elite, which is a 67-inch 5-banded tuna gun essentially. And it's being replaced now with the Rife Raider, which is, I brought one to show everyone. It's just like a streamlined version of those Rife mid-handle guns. It's the newer one. And I took a couple really nice ones with their new 70-inch gun this year. Having that penetration power and the ability to hit these fish is really important. I've seen so many of these fish get shot even by big tuna guns and get spined, where the slip tip hits the actual spine of the fish and then backs out and toggles like right under the skin of the side you shot the fish in. And like, you can still stand a pretty good chance of landing a really big fish just on the skin. But again, if you're shooting, you can land these fish with big Euro guns or smaller mid-handle guns. It's totally possible, but you're probably going to lose a lot of fish. So the right equipment's really important. These bluefin, surprisingly, I would say pound for pound, don't take floats down quite as hard as big yellowfin or dogtooth do. So realistically, like with like 1 3-atmosphere or gannet float, you should have no problem. But we normally put 2 on, because the 250 plus pound fish will for sure take 2 down, but they normally come up pretty quick. A bungee is essential, not just like a short 6-foot section of bungee on your float line, but like a full length, 75 to 120 foot bungee, which Maury makes them, Rife makes them. I'm sure Neptonics and everyone else are making them. But yeah, a substantial, like, I don't know, they're probably close to 1/2-inch diameter bungee that'll stretch to like 300% of its initial length there. That really helps tire the fish out and helps you successfully and quickly land fish, get them on deck. Yeah. Line management. Oh God, I've seen some nightmares over the years. So what he means by line management is you shoot a fish, you're bringing the fish up, always be aware of where that line you're pulling up is. I remember one time we were diving Hatteras in North Carolina, and it was a huge tournament back in the early 2000s when I was diving it. And I remember watching this guy who clearly wasn't super experienced with spearfishing. He shot an amberjack, and he's on the surface, and he's pulling up like 100 feet of bungee because he let this fish run and run and run. And he's not swimming at all. He's just pulling the bungee up, and it's all just coiled under his belly as he floats on the surface. It's wrapped around his head, it's wrapped around his arms and his fins. And realistically, if one of those fish were to take off, it could take you down so quickly. I shot my first really big bluefin I shot. It ended up being a 265-pound fish, and I shot it, and it fought and fought and fought. The boat actually left me to fight the fish while they went to get someone else on fish, which I never recommend doing. It's super dangerous, but they had done that this day anyways. Anyways, they came back. My fish had been bleeding for like 20 minutes, and I had it clipped off real short. I was waiting for the kill gun. So you assume this fish had been just pouring blood out for 20 minutes. I mean, aside from me thinking I was probably going to get eaten by a shark, I thought the fish was going to be pretty out of gas. Like, this is actually not all that bad. So I get the kill gun, which is typically we'll use like a smaller, like 110 centimeter Euro with no flopper, so that you can shoot the fish and try to break its spine or get it in the brain, stone it essentially. And if you don't quite do that, there's no flopper, so you can just pull the shaft straight back out rather than turning your fish into a pincushion with like 7 shafts in it, which I've seen a lot of people do. That's just a recipe for destroying every shaft on the boat. Anyways, so I go down. It's about 25 feet from the surface to where this big bluefin is, and it's kicking all slow. So I go down, I line up to where I think the stone shot is, but this shaft has been used to stone a lot of bluefin, so it looks like a noodle. It's all wiggly. And I pull the trigger, and I don't quite stone it, and in the time from when I shot the fish to me getting to like within 5 feet of the surface, this fish took off and completely dumped like 150 feet of reel line out of my reel and ripped the gun out of my hands. So had you been wrapped up when a fish made a run like that, you're going with it. Like there's no way around it, which also illustrates the reason to have a really sharp knife. We shoot all of our, well, me and my friends shoot all of our tuna with cable. A lot of guys will use mono or a lot of these like synthetic braids, these really tight braid lines. But I have seen on both the slip tips and the shooting line, plenty of line break from it getting up inside the fish where there's a lot of broken bones that are quite sharp and will cut things. So I use cable, and again, because of the whole danger of getting wrapped, I like a double serrated knife so you can cut the cable. There's quite a few knives on the market that do that. Rife, I use their Terminator, or now they have the Everyday Carry, I believe they call it, or the Wrangler was the one before. Anyways, something sharp that cuts cable is what's important. And I guess to circle all the way back to line management here, when you're pulling up a fish and you're pulling line in, they say it should be like you're climbing a rope. So as you pull line up with the fish, this is in pretty much every situation you're spearfishing, you should be slowly like kind of finning yourself forward and letting that line fall back behind you. Clear your fins, clear your snorkel, clear of everything, and you should constantly be checking to make sure that that line isn't getting wrapped up on anything.
It's easy if you just kick into the current.
Yeah, it's really easy if you just kick into the current, which is kind of hard to do when you don't know which way it's coming offshore. But yes. The other thing is, when I was talking earlier about being a good dive partner, that's another really important time to be in the water. If somebody has a fish on, especially a big bluefin, and there's somebody else suited up, they should be in the water watching, making sure that that guy's not getting wrapped up by line, handing them their second shotgun, you know, just there for assistance and safety. That's huge. That goes a long way. That was a really long answer for line management. So we've had days where you're shooting bluefin like on the surface, and then I've had days where you're bottoming out your 100-foot bungee and you're hanging down there and you're just staring at these fish that are 40 feet away from you, vortexing you. But more or less, I would say between 30 and 60 feet probably is where we shoot, where I've seen the majority of the bluefin. And it's really interesting actually. A lot of times you won't see much surface action, but you'll know that there's bluefin in an area, and you'll get there and you'll start working around and you'll be marking these fish on the meter, on the fish finder, right? And they're very unique when you see the bluefin on the meter. If the meter is like tuned right and working right, there'll be like a very distinct like red arc, and there'll normally be a whole bunch of them. Like you'll be seeing like nothing, maybe like some bait and jellies on the meter, and then all of a sudden this like parade of red arcs comes across the screen. And that means the tunas are underneath you. And a really interesting thing that seems to be pretty common is I feel like those fish will come up about, say you see the fish at 100 feet, they'll probably meet you at 50 feet if you get in the water and make a dive right then. Like typically like they'll come up like almost half. So whatever, if the fish are at 120 feet, if you dive to 60 feet, there's a really good chance you're going to see them. So you'll see a lot of guys that are like, oh yeah, we were seeing tunas on the meter, but they were all 80 feet, and we're only 40-foot divers, so we didn't even try. And it's like, well, if you tried, you probably would have seen them at 40 feet. So it's kind of good to know. Yeah, they're curious. A lot of times they'll come check you out, and it might not be for very long, and they might not even come within range, but plenty of times they will. Yeah, they're a real fun fish to hunt, especially on the days when the water's clear. Like the visuals when you get in and you see this like really big school of really big fish. I mean, they're incredible. You could watch it all day, and it's pretty interesting.
Ryan, you guys ever chum while you're diving?
For bluefin, for chum, no. We've tried it, and we haven't had good reactions. Like they pretty much just don't care. I know that a lot of the sport boats, they can like throw like scoops and scoops of bait. They can get them going, but typically it hasn't worked out well for us. A lot of other parts of the world, hunting like yellowfin and wahoo and dogtooth, and even a lot of reef species, chum and burley work really good. A lot of places, it's almost not worth diving without chum. But here, honestly, in California as a whole, I don't typically bring chum because I've just personally never seen it that useful. I mean, yeah, I'm sure if you dumped like a whole box of squid on the bottom, you get a lot of sheephead. But yeah, for a lot of the pelagics, they don't seem very interested. And even the flasher, like I talked about before, I know I've seen bluefin come in and like kind of buzz the flasher, but nothing like suicidal like you see in other parts of the world where like yellowfin and wahoo or just like come up and want to eat that thing. So yeah. But they are curious. So if you're in the water and you're making dives, there's a really good chance that, you know, they're going to come in close enough.
What's some of the more scary experiences? Like, I don't know, big animals or?
Yeah. I mean, the scariest experience is probably when you're diving with someone and you just can't find them. And, you know, it's just the kind of the nature of free diving, you know, it's really easy to just maybe not be able to see someone. I've been, you know, over the years shore diving and, you know, so-and-so decides they're going to swim all the way down and around the point. And you have no idea they did that. You even sit on the beach for an hour and a half and you're like, do I need to call the Coast Guard? Or, I know that's not what you meant.
How about currents?
Yeah, well, currents, I mean, in a lot of parts of the world, like Indonesia, the down currents are extremely dangerous. So, like, they have these things called down currents where the water is moving with so much force. These are, like, really, like, 6+ knot currents, 10 knot currents that are ripping through these reefs. And you'll have two currents intersect each other, and one will force the other one down. So I've actually never dove into, but I've heard a lot of stories from my buddies of them being, say, like they're hunting doggies, and they punch a dive down to 100 feet. And they start coming up from their dive, and they're kicking, and they're kicking, and they're kicking, and they just don't feel like something feels off. And they look at their dive watch, and they're like 120 feet because they're in a down current, and they're getting sucked down. It kills divers like every year over there. Scuba divers and free divers just disappear because they just get sucked down out of their control. They say you're supposed to try to like swim sideways out of it, but I guess that's kind of subject to the actual down current because you might not be swimming the right direction. You might just be swimming into more down current. There's obviously a lot of big sharks I've seen over the years around the world. My first time diving over on the East Coast, we spent a bunch of time in Bahamas and Florida and North Carolina. A lot of big bull sharks, and yeah, it's completely unlike any other shark. There's something about bull sharks, like they believe they say like they actually have like a really high testosterone level, and you can totally feel it in their body language. They just don't care at all about you, and they're just going to take whatever they want, and there's really nothing you can do to stop them. They're vicious. They're gnarly. I've dove with a lot of big tigers. They're kind of cool. They're definitely spooky. I remember one day we were diving in Japan, and it was really cloudy, but it was really clear. And we had this like massive tiger. It had to be like 14, 15 foot, and it had this gut on it. It looked like it ate a Volkswagen. And it just kept like stalking us. It would stay like right on the edge of the visibility, and you just see it there. And you'd watch it for a while, and it'd kind of make you uncomfortable. And then it would disappear, and then 20 minutes later, someone else would see it. But they're pretty standoffish. The white sharks around here, definitely. I've never ran into one personally yet. Knock on wood, thank God. But yeah, they're here, and that definitely creeps me out. I don't know if it has to do with there being just more social media and more drones and people in the water, but I know, and the lack of gill nets. I know that their numbers seem to be rising, and it definitely, I find myself more often now getting out of the water if it feels uncomfortable than I ever did before. So yeah, that's always lingering there in the back of your mind, or for me at least. Yeah, you can shoot them in Mexican waters, absolutely, and they get really big ones.
3 days later or something like that.
Oh wow. Yeah, no, we have them. You cannot shoot them in the States, but in Mexico there is a lot of them, and you can shoot them. Yeah, I've never eaten black sea bass, but I hear it's really good. I shot one time when we were in Mexico, and it was kind of already like prearranged. The pongueros we were with were commercial fishermen, and they asked us to shoot them. So we shot them one, and they were very grateful. I didn't get to try it though. Yeah, they get huge. Yeah, obviously we got a lot of white sea bass. This is the right time of year too. Right now, springtime, you get a lot of the big females and the smaller males coming in to spawn in the kelp beds. If you're interested in shooting a white sea bass, I would spend the next 2 months on the kelp, pretty much anywhere. Pretty good chance you're going to run across one. Yeah. Yeah. All right, thanks, guys.